Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And hello, we are back with Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I have Mike Lingle on. He's coming in from the US. We are both part of the Open EXO community, the global community of over 6,000 people, exponential thinkers and doers. And I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit. And I'm really interested to hear about Rocket Forma, which is Mike's organization that helps startups with I think their financial planning and preparing to get equity and financial support. I'm really fascinated to hear about that and the other things that Mike has been working on. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining. Can you please, for myself and for the audience, share what do you do, Mike? So what is it that you do, and why do you do what you do?
Right. So I am a former software developer turned entrepreneur, and I have built a few different businesses, one of which had an exit, which was great. So then I started working with other entrepreneurs trying to give back, and have run a few accelerator programs, started creating all kinds of content and templates and stuff to help other folks. I guess trying to help them avoid the mistakes that I made along the way. That's really part of what I'm doing. I was speaking to someone the other day, and they said most people start businesses to solve problems for their past selves, which I thought was a pretty good way of looking at it. And so in my work with entrepreneurs, which I've been doing for, I don't know, I guess almost 10 years now, I keep seeing two main problems. One is, people don't understand the customer or the market as well as they should. I think most entrepreneurs are pretty good with the product or service that they're creating. They might be a little fuzzy on the customer, and then they're a lot fuzzy on their numbers. So that's the second big problem. They don't really understand the numbers. They don't really understand the finance piece of it, because they're usually coming at it from a product perspective. And so that leads to problems, because finance is actually the foundation of business. And that's the language you need to learn to speak, at least a little bit. You don't have to be fluent. You don't have to be an accountant. You don't have to work on Wall Street, but you got to be good enough that you can run the business. Especially if you're going to go ask someone else for money, there needs to be a plan around what happens with that money, right? What are the expenses? What's the hiring plan? What are the revenues going to look like? How are we going to generate the revenue? There's just some thinking that needs to happen. So similar to you mentioned that you were trying to figure out when COVID hit, how do I help the most people? That was my thought process with Rocket Forma. So I launched right as on April 1st, basically. So we've been in lockdown a little while, and I was looking at this and I was saying this is going to last. It's going to last a while, and the way I can help people most is by helping them with their numbers, because a lot of people are going to need to start businesses or pivot businesses, just because so much is changing and the bottom is dropping out of some industries. Meanwhile, other industries are taking off like rocket ships.
Is there something that, because not everyone, once they've learned these precious skills, not everyone would turn it around and give it back to the community. Sometimes they would jump into new organizations or corporates and sort of hoard that knowledge for themselves because it's very powerful. Why or what inspires you to serve in this way? I'm really curious.
I think I really like the moment when people start companies. I keep drifting back to super early stage companies. And I just like that mindset. I like those entrepreneurs. They have a lot to learn, so I can really help them. I feel like I can really make a difference. And I have done some of what you talked about. I've joined organizations and worked from within the organizations, including EXO, as a member of the core team for 2 years. And it's all been great. But I keep coming back to like this moment of business creation and really trying to help people, give them just enough knowledge that they can succeed without trying to overwhelm them or bog them down with complicated training. And, the finance thing it's not really my core skill. Like, I'm not a finance person. I'm not an accountant. I didn't come from Wall Street. When I started my first business, it was because I was a good programmer, and the whole business grew from that. And I got really lucky. Like things grew quickly. I was hiring people. I brought in a business partner. Things were going great. And then the dot-com crash hit. That's, I have the white hair, so I've been around a while.
Mm-hmm.
So the dot-com crash hit, and then all of a sudden, our healthy-looking company, and I'll dip into the accounting for a second, our income statement looked really healthy, but our cash flow suddenly dried up, right? And we didn't really have a buffer. And all of a sudden, we had to like lay people off, and the whole business ended up in debt. My business partner left, and I brought that business back from the edge. But it was really like a defining moment in my evolution as an entrepreneur. First of all, I felt terrible because we had to lay people off. And I feel like when I'm hiring people, I want to make them a promise that, I'll take care of them. And then two, we just we hadn't really thought things through very well. And our business only worked when things were going well. And I was actually reading about Bill Gates when he started Microsoft. He had this rule that they had to keep a year of cash in the bank at all times. So his thought process was, look, I've hired the smartest people on the planet with a bunch of smart people and a year's worth of cash. No matter what happens to Microsoft, we'll be able to figure out some pivot, right? So he's now the richest man in the world, and I'm not, right? Or second richest or third richest or wherever he is today. I think Elon Musk is catching up. But from that moment, when I was rebuilding the company, I started figuring out the finance piece, and I actually started doing my own books. Like I'd been outsourcing to a bookkeeper, and I said, look, I've got to figure this out. I've got to do it myself. I eventually went back to outsourcing to a bookkeeper, but that was actually something that really helped me understand enough accounting to run the business properly. So we brought the business back from the brink. I brought in another business partner. We took the whole thing to the cloud. We ended up raising some venture capital. That whole second experience went much better. I actually built a bunch of the financial model that we used to raise our first $2 million. And then we ran the company off of that plan for the next year. So it wasn't just like a dog and pony show that we trotted out for the VCs. Like it was a real plan that we had put together, and we ran the business off of it. That company ended up getting acquired, which led me to, okay, how can I give back? And then in running the accelerator programs and, just seeing what entrepreneurs are tripping over, the finance thing just comes up over and over and over again. And so people started hiring me to build their financial models, which was totally cool. But I found that I was doing them a disservice because I would build this fancy financial model, hand it to them, and they still wouldn't understand the numbers. So they still couldn't run the business. They still couldn't, when you're talking to an investor, that investor starts asking questions about the model, and you're like, I don't know, I got to get my financial model, dude.
And that's the wrong answer. And at that moment, that is the
answer.
Absolute wrong answer. I don't know is not confidence inspiring.
There are some things it's okay not to know, but if you're asking someone for a chunk of money, if you don't understand the financial plan, that does not inspire confidence. So I actually built the first version of Rocket Pro Forma probably 5 years ago as a tool for myself to give myself a running start when I was building these financial models, but then also to find some sort of middle ground where spreadsheets are full of lots of little boxes, and it just confuses the heck out of people, and it causes a lot of people's brains to shut down. But you need that, right? You still need the 3 financial statements. You need an income statement, a cash flow statement, a balance sheet, and then you need a pitch deck slide. So what I built was an engine that creates those things for you. So it creates the 3 financial statements and the pitch deck slide for you. But what you do is you answer some questions that looks much more like a wizard. Like it looks much more like, a friendly piece of software. And that allows you to project years of financials, and then the spreadsheet does all the heavy lifting for you on the back end. And so that ended up working really well with the entrepreneurs I was working with, because I could build something complicated, but then hand it to them and they would understand it, and then they could start making their own changes. Fast forward to COVID hits, I've got this thing lying around. I've been meaning to do this for a while, and I was like, this is the way I can help the most people. So, I've productized it and turned it into a self-serve where people can just pick it up and run with it. And I've recorded a bunch of video instruction. There's a lot of me in there that you can tap into for help. But it is pretty amazing because, watching people go from not really understanding it, if you spend 2 hours and go through and answer all the questions, first of all, you have a working draft of your financial model. And second of all, you've built the mental map. So it's much easier. Like now you at least know the whole landscape and you know what questions to start asking.
Yeah, fascinating. Little side story to connect us. I'm very much the opposite, meaning I am an accountant.
Oh, or at least
I'm very much trained and have a degree in accountancy. However, have been pulled into technology, so our paths were almost exactly the opposite. And it makes me a bit of a different CIO and CTO when I have those roles, because I'm asking about financial value,
which is what you should be asking.
Which is what you should, but in technology land, it seems to be so rare. I'm starting up very soon a digital and technology strategy project for a fashion brand here in the Netherlands, and I've asked for 5 years of financials around all tech spend, and they're like, "Well, why would you possibly want that?" I said, "Well, that's where we're starting, and the outcome will be an investment plan, not a technology plan." They're like, "Oh, okay," and so it was but that's not what they're expecting. And no, I'm really fascinated. I would love to see your tool, because last little thing about me is there's a startup and residence program through the city of Amsterdam. And they asked me to put up basically an Excel model that is super simple for these companies that are applying to actually mostly demonstrate that they have some financial acumen. And it was so hard to try to make something meaningful and simple. So I think I'm just going to refer them to, Rocket Forma as well, and say, well, just do that. Because doing Excel and anyone who uses Excel will change Excel, and then you have the integrity issues, and are you reading the same thing? And so who's the perfect user for Rocket Forma? Like who's the person, the imaginary avatar or whatever that you built this for?
There's two real personas. There's a first-time entrepreneur who doesn't really understand the finance piece and doesn't really understand spreadsheets and needs to put together a plan. And that works really well. There's a second persona, which is someone who's maybe going through this a second time or has some spreadsheet expertise and could do it themselves, but just wants a running start, right? Because I've built something that handles most use cases and is pretty well thought out. So at this point, it's almost like a checklist with a bunch of wiring. It handles subscription models, it handles inventory, you can layer different business models, and to try to build that yourself would just slow you down. I think it works best from idea stage through Series A. I think after Series A, companies tend to have much more financial knowledge and more financial support, right? Like someone is in charge of their financial model. But from that idea through to Series A is the sweet spot.
Does that imply that it needs to be someone who's seeking funding?
Well,
could you use this just to manage your business?
So the short answer is you can use it to manage your business. If you're asking me or you're asking you, as you just stated, both of us are going to start from the finance. I don't think most entrepreneurs do that. So the trigger that forces people who are coming at it from a product perspective is that they have to show a financial plan to someone. So that tends to be when they're applying to an accelerator or going to investors for funding. In my perfect world, everyone would be using this to plan and run their business. But it's not my perfect world out there.
Well, not yet, but I think, between us and perfect world is just a lot of people educating each other on how things, and then we will all get better at it. So I've been confronted by someone that I've been doing some coaching with who is starting a new business and does not want to do the finances. So he wants to just hire a younger financial person. And I'm still wrestling with how to respond to that.
That's not the way a business person talks.
Yeah.
Like if he wants to start a company, he's going to have to figure out the financial piece at some point.
Yeah. It's, I think it's, it's unavoidable.
And also like saying you want to ride a bike without learning how to pedal. Like you want someone else to do the pedaling, but you'll wear the helmet and the fancy jersey.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, how do you charge for this, I guess, or what is the revenue model that you have for people
Yeah,
to subscribe?
I'm still testing this, and basically
Okay.
I've made it super cheap to begin with for a couple of reasons. One, because everyone's, a lot of people are struggling right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a self-serve version, which at the moment costs $44, and you get the spreadsheet plus the education. I've also been doing sessions where I work with the entrepreneur. So I'll do like a 60-minute setup. We'll get on a call and I'll help them basically create a draft of their initial financial model.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those sessions, it really takes about 90 minutes to do this properly and get to a first draft with me driving. And for that, I've been charging $99. But it's been great because I learned so much on those sessions. Like I'm definitely underpricing myself, but it's amazing customer validation. And the product has evolved so quickly from those conversations.
Yeah, I'd like to interrupt you right there and just to anyone who's listening right now, to have 90 minutes with Mike, clearly with his expertise and background for $99, press stop right now. Stop listening to this. Go to Rocket Performa and sign up for that right now, because that price will go up, and that will be
it's going up soon.
That will be an incredible opportunity. So just to have, my feeling is just to have 90 minutes with Mike and talking about your business will already be, payback many times of that. So press stop or pause, go sign up, come back and start listening again. So, okay. So after they have signed up, so there's probably a bunch of people, swiping credit cards right now. What happens?
So, yeah, I'm actually watching them swipe credit cards right now. A partner just sent out an email blast, so it's going by on the screen.
Ding 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 ding. So can you explain a little bit the journey? So they if it's somebody who's probably a first-time business owner, they might not even know the questions to ask, much less how to answer them.
Correct.
They probably haven't even thought much about the business models, whether it's subscription or if it's one-time purchase, or how to deal with inventory and how to deal with assets and things like that. What's the process like? How do you guide them through this and make this abstract thing in the beginning into something very tangible?
So I've tried to set it up like a wizard that walks you through questions. And part of what happens is the questions adjust based on the business model you choose. So I have like a little engine at the beginning where you say like, I'm a marketplace, or I'm a subscription business, or I'm e-commerce, or I'm going to be manufacturing something. And then the rest of the questions kind of adjust, and certain things activate or deactivate to try to make it simpler. I've put in links everywhere I can think of to pop up little, 1 minute or 2 minute videos of me explaining whatever the concept is or how to think about whatever that thing is. The number one piece of feedback I get from pure beginners is I feel like I'm pulling numbers out of thin air. And this has been the topic of a bunch of posts I've been doing on LinkedIn and on my blog this week. And I think that's natural, and I think that's okay. I think the first time through, it's fine to pull numbers out of thin air. And the goal is actually to go through all the questions so that you have the complete map in your head. Like you're building a mental map, and that's more important the first time through than it is to get the numbers exactly right. P.S. You're not going to be able to get the numbers exactly right because you won't know what the numbers are until you actually run the business, right? So you're going to be guessing. Any investor you're talking to knows you're making this up, but they want to know that you've gone through the thought process and that you can defend it. Yeah. So your first draft is going to be kind of a mess, but it'll help you a ton understanding what's happening. And just like you said, understanding, okay, I need a hiring plan. There is inventory. There is shipping. I need insurance, like all of those things. And if I'm going to be selling products, somehow I have to bring those customers in. So here's what I'm going to have SEO. I'm going to have paid ads. I might have, if I'm doing B2B, I might have a sales team out selling. My salespeople need a quota and I need to hire the salespeople. It doesn't mean you're going to get all that right. It just means like, okay, now the gears are turning. So that's phase one, is pulling numbers out of thin air and building the mental map. Phase two is doing some research. So what happens when people put together their finances, their first financial projections is they tell a story, but it's a confused story, because what they're projecting doesn't match up to what most companies end up looking like in their industry when they really start running. So there are industry standards that you can look at. Like, you can look at the cost of goods sold percentages, the gross profit, gross margin percentages for specific companies or industries. For example, I was talking to a guy earlier this week who was projecting a 98% gross margin for a software business. And I said, look, one of the best run software businesses is Salesforce.com. They have a 75% gross margin. You're probably not putting enough things into your cost of goods sold. And so I can tell that because I've just done this a million times.
Yeah.
But there's a second phase of like doing the research. So Googling, like I provide links to people, talking to mentors, if they're working with an accelerator or working with you or working with me, like we can kind of guide them according to their stage and business. But I do think you have to start to converge, like Record Performance is a 3-year projection. And I think you have to converge by year 3. It's got to start to be in the neighborhood of your industry or, Salesforce.com or whatever you're using as your model. You still haven't done any actual, you just don't have any actual data, but at least now you've dialed it in that second pass. So the third stage is when you actually start running parts of the business. And so then you start learning what are my real numbers, right? And usually the expenses start running first because the expenses are real and the revenue is imaginary until you get customers. Then you start running the customer piece. And I think where people run into the real world is on the customer acquisition side. Like, just because you throw a bunch of money at advertising doesn't mean a bunch of customers are going to show up, right? So you have to work through that to really understand the metrics. But as you get that information, you can start plugging that into the model. And then I think, so that's the third stage, is having some real data. And then the fourth stage is mastery, right? So if you really build a successful business, you're going to get better at predicting. You're going to have better data. You're going to hire people who are great at their jobs and are also good at predicting and can help you find better data. And as a group, you will just get much better at doing this. But you'll never get it exactly right. I mean, we're all homebound all of a sudden and none of us can go outside. Like, you can't ever plan exactly what's going to happen in the future, but you just get better and better over time. And I think when you go to raise money, sorry, one more thing. I think when you go to raise money, you have to be at least stage 2, which is you've gone beyond pulling numbers out of thin air into something that is at least researched and that you can explain why. And I think investors, really want to see you at stage 3, where you run some stuff through the business and your numbers reflect your actual reality. That's it. I'm done. I
love it. Well, it makes sense, and it's actually very similar to how I bring people through the simplicity scan. And the end goal of the simplicity scan is 15 statements that represent a business, sort of the prime aspects of a business. And when they're starting, I do basically the same thing. I have them look at and do a quick sketch through the scan, just to get a feel for it, that mental map. Then I say, put the scan away, and then in a notebook or some other document, write multiple times and go through multiple iterations, realizing that stuff doesn't make sense and doesn't add up. So if you're talking about, okay, who's your customer, well, write down as many ideas you have on who your customer is. Later, you're going to simplify it, and then the next step is actually to consolidate that down into the 15 steps. And then you call it mastery. I like your word better than mine. I just call it repeat. Basically do it again, and because that's more of the living with it. I'm curious. When people are venture building and they're building this financial model, what do you recommend to people to actually validate with customers up front? Because you said, I love how you said that the profit or the revenue is imaginary because the customers haven't come yet. How in your expertise, can you de-risk that? I think you have to start charging customers as soon as possible. So I think there are a few mistakes here. And I think the symptom is when someone shows up and says, I need to raise money because I put $300,000 into the product. And then I start asking, well, what are your customers like? And they're like, we don't have any customers. We've built this amazing product. So you have essentially wasted a giant chunk of whatever money you put into that product because the customer needs to be part of the design process in order for that product to be successful.
PSC Magic Leap if you want to see what happens when you do super stealth mode. $2.6 billion with a B, and they just self-destructed because they were trying to do stealth mode and never built anything anyone wanted to use. So
it must have been really fun for them, though.
It must have been really. They were spending like $50 million a month on.
And you cannot not
whatever.
have fun at $50 million a month. So I'm just saying, it
That's
depends on your measure of success.
Yes, that's fair. And I think so. The customers need to be just part of the design process. So that's one thing. So as soon as possible, get customers in. And a lot of the advice that you hear when you're doing a startup is, have a product that's not fully finished and get people in to look at it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs push back on that because it's their baby. They want it to be perfect. It cannot approach perfection without designing around the customer. And there are two really good books that I've read. One is called Sprint. It's by a guy named Jake Knapp, Knapp. It's the Google design sprint process.
Yep.
And it's out of Google Ventures.
Yep.
Yeah, great. And you don't have to build anything, right? It's like prototypes and then interviews. And you don't have to do 5 interviews and you learn a ton. You learn all the things about why your beautiful buttons aren't easy to use. Actually, it's really funny with EXO. We did a whole thing where we launched with the discount code, and like all these super smart people around the world couldn't figure out how to use the discount code. That is the reality of user experience, is they don't understand anything you're talking about. And then 2, there's another book called The Right It by Alberto Savoia.
I've got that laying around here somewhere. Yeah. I think it's down by my
where
head.
He takes it even earlier. And he says, look, all you need is really a napkin sketch and an idea. But the key thing is getting people to put some skin in the game. So how early can you get them to give you their email address? And even better, how early can you get them to give you money, right? Because you're not really designing the business until you have some money flowing through. And I think I may not be in the consensus about this, but when I'm working with startups and they tell me they're working with a bunch of free customers and designing around the needs of those free customers as a beta, I'm like, those aren't customers. Like, you're designing around people who don't want to pay you, which is fine, but that doesn't mean that when you suddenly start charging money, those people are going to pay you. You may have built features that a paying customer doesn't want and doesn't drive them to pay. You're much better off finding paying customers first and then building around them.
I'm about to start crying right now because you're reminding me of just some spectacular fuck ups I've contributed to in my past, and and I'm delighted that you're saying it, because I am just championing this every moment. Validate with your real customers, get money who pay before you build or invest, and it's I don't know if people can hear it unless they've been burned.
I don't think they can.
Yeah,
I have this conversation a lot.
Yeah.
People don't want to listen until they're ready to listen. And that usually takes some trigger, which is unfortunately not a fun trigger. Like, it took me having to lay off a bunch of great people that I had hired to be like, oh, I should learn finance to run a business, So guilty.
We all are, and it's learning, but I pray that some people are listening to this and are taking some inspiration from this.
So the one thing I will say is that with Rocket Pro Forma, as quickly as I could, I got up the self-serve version and the sessions. And the sessions are me getting paid to do the customer validation. The self-serve proves that people will buy it, but I don't necessarily have a front row seat to how they interact with the product. But with the sessions, when I sit with them for 60 to 90 minutes and I hear their questions and I'm trying to use my own product to quickly solve their problem, man, that, I'm getting paid to improve my product and build something that better suits the customer. So that's been my strategy.
What do you mean you don't have a front row seat with how they're using your product?
Because at the moment, so this is true MVP style. Rocket Pro Forma is a spreadsheet, so it exists as a Google Sheet. So I don't get, like, if I hand you a copy of the Google Sheet, you make a copy, and I can't see what you're doing unless you come back to me and share your copy with me. So sometimes that happens and people have built some amazing stuff, but I haven't built any software yet, because I want to prove the market before I start building the software. So that's another trick. Keep the expenses low so that you can understand the customer and then build the tech around the customer.
Yeah.
But it costs me some data.
Yeah, going into solution mode slightly, it sounds like have you ever heard of Airtable and Hotjar?
Yes.
Do that. So if you build a spreadsheet in Airtable and have it as a web front end, and then put Hotjar on it so that you can watch the interaction. I don't know, just an idea. But
yes, I don't think Airtable can do what I'm doing in Google Sheets. The last time I looked at Airtable, it wasn't capable enough. That doesn't mean this is a whole separate conversation. There's also a way to slap a front end on a Google spreadsheet. So the Google spreadsheet still exists, but you build an app on top of it. So there are options. I haven't pulled the trigger on doing any of that.
No, fun. And question, have you put Rocket Proforma through Rocket Proforma? Meaning, are you eating your own dog food here?
So no, I haven't. And I keep meaning to do that.
Damn you.
I did build a pitch deck.
Okay.
The answer should be yes. And I keep being like, oh, I should run it through Rocket Proforma. I have not. I've built financial models for a ton of other people. And that keeps being on my to-do list, but you are reminding me that I need to do it sooner rather than later.
Well, it's so hard, and they say that whatever, the cobbler's kids don't have the shoes and stuff, but it's
right.
I try to hold myself accountable and use the simplicity scan on myself now and again.
Yep.
And it's helpful. Not only is it helpful to force my own thinking about the business, but also just to reflect on usability and ease of use, and sort of go in it every once in a while.
Have you talked to Tony Saldana yet? Have you come across him in the EXO world?
Nope.
Okay. So Tony Saldana was the CIO of Gillette, and he was at P&G for 23 years or something.
Yeah.
He hired Salim and asked Salim to come speak. And the sprint process that OpenEXO and EXO run actually came sort of from Tony. Oh, wow. And Francisco and Salim co-opted it.
Right.
Sort of. What Tony built at P&G was he got permission to build an innovation team that was focused on core initiatives. So they would improve the efficiency of existing processes, and it was all back office stuff. So it was payroll, accounting, logistics, whatever. Mm-hmm. And he gave himself a couple superpowers. One is he was able to go and ask a division. He could submit a list of like 4 or 5 people that he wanted for his team, and they had to give him one. And he would only pick people who were super connected in that division. So he would get someone on his team for a year or two who could then liaise with whatever the division was. Then he would go to the division head and say, what are your biggest problems? And then he would come back and iterate with the team and try and figure out how to solve them. He would only do projects that had a 10x opportunity, either in revenue, cost savings, or customer satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And put this thing together that basically built, and then he did some smart stuff around development. So he got the superpower of being able to onboard small developers and startups without having to go through the full legal process. And so he would go out to the VCs and say, look, we're thinking about doing this. Give me some building block companies that are your startups. He would take those startups and plug it in to build like a working pilot. And then he was like ruthless about the pilots. So if the pilot was working, cool. If not, he would just axe it. And he just made sure that he had enough ideas going that he could keep the pipeline full. And if something was looking like it was working out, he would pull it into one of their actual IT partners. But even then, he would try not to pay the IT partner to build it. He would say, look, if you build this, you can test it through P&G. You can list P&G as a customer. We will pay you once it's working, but we're not going to pay you to develop it. And P.S., we're going to license you the IP so you can turn around and sell it to someone who's not one of our competitors, but we'll get a license fee back. So in some instances, he turned some of these IT backend functions into revenue generators. And in 3 years, he did like 25 working pilots and ended up generating like $400 million worth of value. And it was only really just taking off. Like he retired and then brought someone else in to run the business. But he's pretty amazing to talk to. And one of his secrets was exactly what you said. He started every project with a finance person. So he made sure that the numbers made sense. And then he was constantly communicating the value of the portfolio to management and saying, look, it looks like we're not doing anything here, but really in 3 years, you're going to have, $400 million of value. In 5 years, it's going to be $1 billion in value. And like he was able to do this whole thing inside P&G, and he located it inside the mothership. So he did it in Cincinnati. Because if you talk to him, he's like, what I needed to do was change the culture more than come up with cool ideas. And so I had to be in Cincinnati in order to achieve that. He wrote a book called Why Digital Transformations Fail that came out
I have read that
last
one.
year.
I have read that one.
Yeah, so he's the author of that.
Yeah, okay.
So, and he's around and he's a friend of EXO. So he's he'd be great if he'd come on your podcast, because you and he would totally
No, I love it.
off.
I wrote it down. I will I'll reach out to him. Outstanding. So we are wrapping up, running out of time. I've really enjoyed this. I have never done this on one of these podcasts before, but I'm now actually demanding people, if they are running a business, to press pause, go to Rocket Pro Forma, put their credit card in. Just because my belief is having 90 minutes with Mike will more than pay itself back on accelerating your initiative. Delight, I want to go play with it as well. Having built something purely on
send you a copy
on Excel in a trying to make it simple way. It's really hard. And if there's the helper videos and things to help people with the concepts, even better. It must have taken you a long time. So it's clearly a project of passion.
Taken me years.
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful to see and hear. So, and I will put in the Sprint book and the Write It book in the show notes. Also put a link for everyone to OpenEXO, the global community of exponential thinkers and doers, which Mike is a part of, and that's how we've come in contact and met up. If you go to rocketproforma.com, you can find it, and also Mike Lingle on LinkedIn. I'll put both of those links in the show notes as well. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining. I found this just delightful to hear how you solve these problems. So, thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to chatting with you at the next opportunity at OpenEXO or at some other moment.
Thanks so much.
Learn more at ebillion.com/podcast.